This edition of FedGov Today with Francis Rose is sponsored by Accenture Federal Services. On this edition of FedGov Today with Francis Rose, two big shifts are on at the federal government's emergency management leader. FEMA CIO Charles Armstrong explains the digital path ahead to plan your agency's future, and working on one of America's biggest healthcare crises ever earns some HHS leaders some special recognition. Welcome to FedGov Today with Francis Rose. The Federal Emergency Management Agency will move all of its grant programs onto a single platform. It's about halfway finished with the job already. Charles Armstrong is Chief Information Officer at FEMA. Charlie, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. We'll talk about FEMA Grants Authority, FEMA GO, in just a moment. What are your main priorities as the CIO at FEMA right now?
Well, first of all, thank you, Francis, for having me here today. Our main focus is really aligning to the mission of the agency, right? Our administrator is very strong on pushing us to align to the concept of being there before, during, and after a disaster in order to support survivors. And so a lot of people don't realize, but our IT shop has about 500 reservists, and whenever a disaster is declared, we get called up and deploy IT staff to those disasters. Sometimes we do it remotely if they can operate remotely. But a lot of times they're on site to stand up networks and equipment and so forth, so they have to be ready to go at a moment's notice.
You have been a CIO in government before. What is that like, having a cadre of folks like that, management-wise, that's different than having all folks that are yours in-house to manage all the time?
Well, that's a great question. In my previous roles, we have had a field component to be out there servicing the front lines officers and agents, either at the ports of entry and between the ports of entry, but never really had a surge workforce. If I had to surge, we were usually surging people from a different region to the region that needed support. And so that meant, I had to figure out how do I keep the region that's working now operating and deploy resources to the spot that needed it. In this environment, I do have this cadre that we can call up on demand and deploy as needed. Now, if times get tough, meaning there's a lot of disasters working, and we get through that, the number of people that we have as reservists, then we start to get into deploying full-time people, even down to myself.
What does that surge concept mean for the way that you have to strategize placement of assets? You got to have hardware and you got to have software available on that hardware. Who knows when and who knows how much?
Yes. Well, we have logistics centers set up throughout the country. However, a lot of our work gets done out of Winchester. A lot of our IT storage and maintenance of equipment gets done out of our VDOC facility. And we have hot racks there where we maintain our equipment and keep it ready to go. And then we work with our logistics arm to package that stuff up and get it deployed, get it there within days, if not sooner.
I mentioned FEMA Grants Outcome, FEMA GO. You testified about that before the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, a subcommittee of that committee not long ago. What was the message you wanted to tell them? Where do you stand with FEMA GO? What is it, and where's it headed?
Well, I think it's come a long way from where it was in 2018. I think Alana Barnhart has done a great job as the program manager. She's managed to get a lot of the functionality in place. They're in the process of putting a contract in place to do the data migration work, which is extremely important and I think probably one of the more difficult pieces. So we've been working hand in hand to make sure that she's going to be successful, because it's critical to the agency and to a lot of our SLTT partners to make sure that grant capability is in place for the future.
I imagine data migration is a challenge all across the agency, as it is for other agencies. How did you address that? How did you assess where you were data-wise when you came in as the CIO and build a plan to move forward to make sure that you had your arms around data?
Well, it's not a one-and-done kind of situation, right? I mean, we have a lot of legacy data that sits in our existing on-prem data center, which we're in the throes of moving out of. So really we're taking it more of an iterative process and doing it system at a time or workload at a time and trying to figure out what's the right way to extract and cleanse and then reload that data. The biggest part is worrying about how do you migrate it out of a legacy center physically to a cloud environment and do that in a timely environment. So making sure that we've got the right plumbing in place to make that happen is critical.
What's your cloud posture look like at FEMA, Charlie?
So a lot of the new programs like FEMA GO have been built on cloud. We recently moved a lot of our flood map information over to GCP. That work was completed in January. So I feel really good about the fact that we've done a lot in cloud. We still have legacy systems that we need to migrate, and we're working through that workload now. We've moved about probably 25% of the workloads out of our data center and into a cloud environment. We've got a fair amount of work left to do as we figure out how do you get data out of our legacy Oracle databases and into something that's more cloud-based. So.
At what point do you think that your cloud journey will, maybe that's something else that's never done. Maybe that's something that's an ongoing journey too?
Well, I think, even once you get there, you're still doing transformation, right? Mm-hmm. I've learned the importance of the difference between hybrid cloud and getting into cloud native, right? And so I think our first focus is let's just get to cloud and let's get out of owning and operating a lot of our own stuff and then really work on, okay, so we've got a lot of things moving to FEMA GO. So maybe I don't have to worry about doing as much transformation work in the legacy system when it comes to things like that. But I've also got systems that don't have a modernization plan in place yet. And so we're going to need to transform those systems, move them to cloud native, and help elongate their service life cycle a few more years until we can get to them.
Shame on me for getting this far into a conversation with a federal CIO and not talking about cyber. You have just gotten authority to use the cyber talent management system that the Homeland Security Department worked for a long time. What does that look like from your perspective, Charlie?
Yes, I'm very delighted with our authority around cyber talent management system. We've been working with DHS headquarters quite a bit on it. We actually made our first offer this week to an individual, not for my shop, but for our Adami shop, which is our analytics. So our first CTMS employee will actually be working in our analytics and AI area. Under Dr. Julie Waters. We have a number of positions that are open in CTMS, and we're continuing to kind of go through the lists and make offers to folks. But quite frankly, it's a who gets there first wins environment. There's a lot of very talented people that are coming in through that process, and agencies are snatching them up pretty quick. So we've been a little slow off the dime, but we're going to speed up our process there and really try to make sure that we're leveraging that.
What does that look like for you long term? Is there a certain number of people, or is there a certain type of talent that you expect to bring in through that system that you haven't been able to or able as fast to before? Or is it just the idea that it's there and you're going to want to leverage it as much as possible?
Well, we're actually doing a combination of, we're doing this SIRUP, which is cyber incentive and retention pay, and CTMS. So I want to be able to both leverage those two systems in order to attract and retain talented cyber professionals across all of FEMA, not just within the IT shop, right? And so I think with the CTMS, we're looking at bringing in skill sets that we maybe don't have today, as opposed to trying to retain the skill sets that we already have. So I'm going to talk a little bit probably during our show about our move to zero trust and the shift in the architecture around that, and why we need some of these newer skill sets and ways of thinking about things and solving these problems.
I'd love to have you come back and talk about those things. We have about a minute left. The time that you spent in government before was different than your time in government now at FEMA. In what ways, Charlie? How have things changed since the last time you were in government?
Well, I don't know if it's a change in government so much as I've gone from an environment where you had a very centralized IT shop to a very decentralized IT shop. And there isn't a wrong model. It's just, the model that you're working in, right? So I'm learning how to do more orchestration of things that might not necessarily be directly under my control, but still very important to the mission. So where I don't have as big of a challenge around convincing operators to invest in IT because they actually own it, I can focus more on the quality and what they do with it and that standpoint. And then the biggest thing is, from my 6-year sabbatical in working with industry, I've upskilled my abilities, and now I'm able to bring in a little bit more innovation and figure out how does it help the mission, things like biometrics and AI and those kind of things.
Charlie Armstrong, it's great to see you. Thanks very much for joining me today.
Thank you, Francis.
You can read more about all the things I talked about with Charlie at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, the digital path ahead to plan your agency's future. FedGov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment. If you want insights from agency and industry leaders on the latest topics in technology, management, workforce, defense, and acquisition, sign up for the FedGov Today podcast with me, Francis Rose. I release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, so you'll stay up to date on the issues that matter most to federal government leaders. Listen at fedgovtoday.com and everywhere you get your shows. Don't miss out on the conversation. Follow the podcast today. Welcome back. The Defense Logistics Agency has a new enterprise resource planning system online now after it finished a 24-month timeline in 16 months. Agencies across government say they're using ERP modernizations to transform their business practices too. Amy Giovannucci is Platform's Capability Lead and Managing Director for Accenture Federal Services. Amy, welcome. It's great to see you.
Thank you.
What do the agencies that do transitions well have in place before they get started with ERP transitions?
I think the agencies that are doing it well are really thinking through it and not thinking as the ERP as the one-stop shop or the one-size-fits-all anymore, and really incorporating the ways that the technology ecosystem has evolved in the last couple of decades since we last did ERP implementations, and really utilizing like low-code platforms, process mining, and looking at ways to take the really complex workflows where ERPs may have not been the way to go initially, right? And kind of we forced it in and really taking a step back and assessing what they have today and using some of those other technologies.
What is changing in the deployment of ERPs and the construction and the transitions of digital modernization of them specifically relative to the broader digital modernization efforts that agencies are undertaking? I
think what's changing really is just all those other players out there, right, in the technology ecosystem to really help us get there. ERPs are really good, right? They've been the backbone of our business operations for decades, but we really need to modernize with the other technologies to really have that full digital transformation. So I think it's really looking outside the box and having those complementary technologies like AI, machine learning, RPA, to really focus on automation, process mining for process improvement, to really build out the ERP, utilize it for what it's used really good at, and really looking at those other technologies and thinking through it. Don't rush.
I mentioned business process modernization at the beginning of our conversation too. How much of the thinking of the preparation that goes into an ERP transition is conceptual like that versus tactical, we need to do these things and implement these technologies? I
think process improvement and really assessing your processes is key. Thinking through what could really stay in the ERP today, what could use some improvements upon it, and what should be in a low-code platform so that you can be flexible and scalable and really kind of transitioning from a real business model to thinking about your employees, right, and your customers, and having that real employee experience with some of these other platforms.
All right, you've shouted out low code twice already, and that's okay. What are the other pieces that leaders should be thinking about in these kinds of transitions that may not be something that's top of mind necessarily?
I think really thinking about different analytics, reporting, DevOps tools, operational tools to kind of being reactive, moving to that more proactive mindset and solutions, but also process mining. I know I keep going back to process improvement.
That's okay.
But it's very important, right, to look at this. This is a great time to really kind of clean house, clean up our processes, and have the ability to design and implement them for how we want to use them today and be flexible to scale in the future.
We have a little bit more than a minute left. I want to go back to this idea of conceptual thinking versus tactical.
Okay.
When you go and talk to folks for the first time, how much of the conversations revolve around we needed to do this, and how much of them revolve around I wonder if we could do this, those kinds of things, to try to think about more than just paving the cow path, to use the old term?
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing is really thinking about the design, incorporating the different personas and using human-centered design in how you're going to design for an experience versus just getting that business process correct and implemented into the technical system. So I think really having your users in mind and really thinking through each use case and how their experience is going to differ.
Quick final thought, how do you best get into the user's head to figure that out?
Oh, great question. I think it's really talking through and sitting in their shoes and understanding what their outcomes are trying to be versus just kind of the business owner.
Amy, thanks very much for joining me. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
You can read more about digital transformation across government at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, working on one of America's biggest healthcare crises ever, earns some HHS leaders some special recognition. You'll meet one of them when FedGov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment. If you want insights from agency and industry leaders on the latest topics in technology, management, workforce, defense, and acquisition, sign up for the FedGov Today podcast with me, Francis Rose. I release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, so you'll stay up to date on the issues that matter most to federal government leaders. Listen at fedgovtoday.com and everywhere you get your shows. Don't miss out on the conversation. Follow the podcast today. Welcome back. Program Office inside the Department of Health and Human Services supports customized services around the country to help deal with the opioid crisis. The program's touched more than 2 million people in 47 states and 2 territories. Megan Meacham is director of the Rural Strategic Initiatives Division in the Federal Office of Rural Health Policy at the Department of Health and Human Services. Megan and her team are winners of the People's Choice Award in this year's Service to America medals from the Partnership for Public Service. Megan, welcome. Congratulations to you and your team, Allison Hutchings, Sarah O'Donnell, and the rest of the team. Tell me about the mission of your organization, what you're doing to try to help people that are dealing with opioid issues.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us here and recognizing this award. So what we do at the Health Resources and Services Administration, known as the Access Agency, we really make sure that people across the country who don't have access to healthcare services get that access to those services. So specifically for our program, we are focused on substance use disorder treatment, prevention, treatment, and recovery services, opioids, and broader behavioral health work as well. So it's a really heartwarming job, even though it's a very dire public health situation.
I note that you're part of the Federal Office of Rural Health Policy. What's different about dealing with the opioid crisis potentially in rural environments compared to urban environments?
Yeah, so we know that the opioid crisis is bad, unfortunately, everywhere. Rural communities just come with a host of additional challenges. Transportation, some of the services that we might rely on in an urban community, public transportation, multiple doctor's offices to choose from, that's just not the case in rural communities. So our office, everything we do is to provide increased access to services. For my program, it's substance use disorder, but then a whole host of other programs as well.
What was the genesis of the program that you specifically and your team work on?
Yeah, so back in 2017, I think, the opioid crisis didn't hit us as a surprise. We've known that this has been going on. But back in 2017, the backdrop of our program was that the overdose death rates were actually worse in rural communities than they were in urban. And over time, that's kind of flipped back and forth. But HRSA as an agency really wanted to do something to address the crisis. So we came together, we came up with this proposal. It was kind of like the actual way that government is supposed to work, where you see a problem, you propose a program to address that problem. It went through the full, HHS approvals. It went up to Congress and it was appropriated. So in 2018, we were able to roll out this program that allows rural communities to address this crisis in the way that best fits the needs of their communities, and just really allows them to tailor their activities based on what they need.
The story about your team's work on the partnership's website says this: throughout the entire Our Corp initiative, sustainability has been at the core of decisions. Sustainability means a lot of things in a lot of different contexts. What does it mean in the context of your work?
Yep. So for us, sustainability really, the important piece is that after federal funding, maybe doesn't continue, we don't want these organizations to be reliant on federal funding and grant funding forever. We really want them to be able to build the services that they can sustain and maintain in their communities. So if you can get someone into treatment, but you can't continue providing the recovery services to keep them in long-term recovery. So that's, it's really important. We work with them to ensure that they know how to properly bill and code so that they can get paid for their services, recruit workforce that will stay in their communities and provide the services. And in many ways, it's finding ways to leverage other funding sources, and partnerships are really important as well to just really build it into what they're doing.
I note the programs that you support operate in a lot of different ways and do a lot of different things. It says here that you're trying to customize those, or you want the providers to customize those to the locales. How do you go about evaluating whether a program is going to work well in that particular area when so many of these are so different?
Yeah, so we have it's kind of a two-pronged approach to addressing our being flexible. So each applicant, they know what they're applying for, and we tell them, broadly, here's the goals and the objectives that we want you to address. And then they provide their needs assessment. They talk about their communities and their applications. And then they talk about the approaches that they want to take. And they know their communities best. So when they are objectively reviewed by peers, and so they are ranked and scored based on what approaches they provide. And so from our perspective, as long as they can meet our objectives and really work to reduce the morbidity and mortality of substance use disorder, they can receive our funding. And then from the other side, we also, from our side in evolving the programs, we work with the grantees a lot. We have regular calls with them. We have listening sessions. We pull them together. We really want to hear their feedback so that programmatically we can continue to evolve our programs and continue to meet their needs. Oftentimes they'll share with us challenges that we maybe weren't familiar with or aware of, and then we'll try to build that into the next iteration of the program to continue meeting their needs. You
kind of anticipated where I wanted to go next, which is it doesn't sound like this is just a case where you drop money on these organizations and then disappear. It sounds like you want this to be an ongoing relationship where you're learning from them about how you might be able to make this work in other places and in other programs. Is that a fair read on my part?
Yeah, absolutely. We have regular interaction with the grantees. We have a technical assistance provider that provides pretty hands-on support for our grantees. And then it really is a learning process, a communication. Our goal is, we're good stewards of federal dollars. We want our grantees to be good stewards of federal dollars, but ultimately we want to see them succeed. And so anything we can do to partner with them to help them get to that success is what our goal.
A little bit about logistics here. Tom Morris, Associate Administrator for Rural Health Policy at HRSA, your boss, I imagine, says they've been able to go from a fuzzy concept to a programmatic reality. What drove that? Was it just good old-fashioned hard work, or were there techniques that you used in order to move from the idea to the appropriations to the execution that you talked about earlier?
Yeah, so the Federal Office of Rural Health Policy has been around since 1987, and so prior to this initiative, which was created in 2018, we do have a lot of experience working in the rural community-based program area. And so we took a lot of the lessons and successes that we've seen through those programs that are more non-categorical, not specific to substance use disorder, but funding that we've seen successes in rural communities. So knowing that a network of organizations coming in and partnering together helps lead to success. Funding levels, even, you don't want to throw $10 million at one rural community. Somewhere, most of our awards are in the $500,000 to $1 million. And so we just really learned from the lessons of the history of our office and then built a lot of that into these programs.
You talked about this a little bit, but I'd like to go into more into how you measure the success of a program to determine whether it is something that, if you're able to, you want to continue to support, whether it's the time to go in a different direction.
Yeah, so in addition to technical assistance, we also do fund an evaluator. Our grantees submit a package of performance metrics. So we are constantly watching them and watching their progress. We're providing them technical assistance to help make sure that we continue to hit the mark. If there's areas where we see that grantees, were maybe not quite hitting the targets or benchmarks that we were hoping to, we increase the technical assistance in that area. And if we're doing well, then we keep doing more of that. But I think to me, which is all important, performance metrics, anyone in government funding programs, it's what we do. It's how we can continue to show the value and the impact of our programs. But for me, some of the successes and impacts are also just those personal stories we hear from the grantees. And so we'll hear from grantees that, through this funding, we placed naloxone in a school, and we know that that school was able to save a life and reverse an overdose. So for me, every life saved is important, and that's enough to keep me going. But we also do have that broader evaluation.
Megan, congratulations to you and your team. I'm grateful to have a chance to talk to you about
Thank you so much for having us.
You can read more about the Sammys and Megan's team's work at fedgovtoday.com. FedGov Today with Francis Rose is back in a moment. You crushed it. If you want insights from agency and industry leaders on the latest topics in technology, management, workforce, defense, and acquisition, sign up for the FedGov Today podcast with me, Francis Rose. I release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, so you'll stay up to date on the issues that matter most to federal government leaders. Listen at fedgovtoday.com and everywhere you get your shows. Don't miss out on the conversation. Follow the podcast today. Welcome back. In today's event spotlight, the GovForward FedRAMP Headliner Summit's coming August 23rd at the Waldorf Astoria in D.C. Speakers from GSA, Capitol Hill, and industry will teach you what's new and what's next in securing the cloud in the federal government. I'll be your MC for the day. You can read more about the event and sign up at govforward.com. FedGov Today's back next Sunday morning at 10:30. The leader of the Joint Warfighting Cloud Capability Contract at DISA, Ryan MacArthur, and the Chief Information Security Officer at DHS, Ken Bible, will be here. Hope you will be too. I'm Francis Rose. Thanks for watching. See you next week.